I'm sure we've all heard of Disney, right? That adorable mouse and all the other lovable characters. Well, when I was a child, my favorite was Pinocchio. He had always appealed to me. The simple fact of him wanting to be a boy was charming and yet strangely unsettling. I mean, what would he do to become a boy? I also found his growing nose quite amusing. Apologies, my name is Brian, and I used to live in a little town in Oklahoma that was known as Vialville, which is French for Old Town. I used to live near some people who loved Disney, and I mean they loved it, so much so that their car had Mickey ears. They seemed like nice people. I didn't get to talk to them much, but from what I heard from other people, they were strange. All they talked about was Disney. I even heard a story of a guy who threw them out. He actually died a few days later. The police found him dead on the floor with white goop surrounding him. Nothing else was found. Just him and that strange white goop. As any murder story in a little town, it popped up on the news as well. Breaking news. Typically, I believe what's on the news, but this time, my brain had a different idea. It told me that all of what they were saying was crap. I didn't know who or what killed him, but the main thing I had to question was the goop. Who would spread goop over a corpse, and what was it? I did get scared, and I couldn't sleep for several nights. Well, they left the house a few months back. I don't know why they just left. No rhyme, no reason. It was actually very strange. They left after the murder took place. But after they left, no one could find them, so the police couldn't ask questions or anything. Typically at this point, I'd give you my thoughts and everything, but this isn't a murder mystery. This is about a rather strange encounter I had at that home. Why I went there will be explained, so keep on listening. Well, I heard that in that house, they left a few treasures. One of those being a rather large Pinocchio doll. Of course, hearing this, my child sparked up inside me, and I wanted that thing so bad. I thought it would be bad to go in there and steal, but then I heard of two guys that went in there and got items and actually sold them for some good money. That really sparked something inside me, and I began to think and think. If they could go in there, so could I. It may seem that I wanted to sell the doll for money, but no. I wanted it for myself. I have no kids, in case you're wondering. I bounced back on the idea for a few days. One day I thought I would go there, but then my angel side said no. But after about 4 days of haggling with my own mind, I couldn't help it any longer. I felt something wash over me. Yeah, I felt agreed and eventually decided to go in there. I took the next opportunity I got, which happened to be 5 days after I had heard of the other two guys. It seemed to all fall in place perfectly. The day after I decided to go there, I get my opportunity. Was this destiny? Nah, just my mind going on. It was a rather normal day. I didn't seem to have anything special to do, so I saw the opportunity and took it while I had the chance. My days seemed to stay on a schedule, but that's another story. I brought 3 things: a bag, a camera, and a flashlight. I knew it would be dark, so I brought the flashlight. The bag would be for whatever I took, and the camera was so I could show my friends so they wouldn't think I was lying. After I got everything ready, I was ready to go on this little adventure. Then it came. The night was upon me. It had come much faster than I expected. It had only taken me about 10 minutes to get everything ready. I made sure of my surroundings, and then I set off. Like I said, I didn't live very far away, maybe like a block. I mean, if I were to stand on a very high thing, then I would be able to see their house. Anyway, as I walked there, I seemed to be having flashbacks of the guy who died. I felt something uneasy in the air, and that uneasiness only seemed to rise as I grew closer to the old, rotting place. I didn't know what to expect out of the house. A rotting piece of trash? Yeah, I expected that too. I seemed to get to the house much faster than I thought I would. I was hoping it would take longer. I didn't know if I would be able to do it. It wasn't huge. It was only 1 story tall and had what appeared to be maybe 5 rooms. It wasn't as bad as I thought it would be. It still looked horrible, but not the kind of condition you'd expect from an old home. Meanwhile, I stepped inside. It was dark, so instinctively, I turned on my flashlight. As soon as I flicked it on, something seemed to move. I looked around, and there was nothing unusual. I just shrugged and let my eyes wander the room, curious to see what was in there. This room had brown walls made of wood that seemed to be decaying every waking moment. The couches, which there were only 2 of, were white and very dusty. I hid one of the cushions to see how much dust would kick up. Knowing my luck, a lot of dust did. It got caught in my eyes and it made me cough. I couldn't see anything with the dust in my eyes, which made my brain, of course, flash images of the dead guy. I seemed to forget about the dust and my eyes shot open. Nothing too odd here. Then my ears seemed to pick up a sound. It was low, so I had to be very quiet to hear it. It sounded like coughing, which I thought was odd, considering I had just coughed. The rest of the room wasn't much to speak of, with the exceptions of the items within the room itself. The items were very odd. There were the normal things, Mickey Mouse, Donald Duck, Goofy, and etc. But there was a certain thing that I saw that really made me want to run. It was a shelf, but on the shelf were some heads. Not human heads, no, Disney heads. Goofy's, Mickey's, and Donald's. It was unsettling, not enough to make me vomit, but still, my stomach began to feel uneasy. There seemed to be some sort of white substance dripping from them. Then, he popped into my head. The dead man. He had been found with the goop around him. That's when my stomach really lurched. My brain was basically yelling at me to leave, but for whatever reason, I had to go on. I swear, I saw one of those eyes move. Maybe it was the paranoia getting to me, but I don't think it was. Despite my best instincts telling me to get out now, I continued into the house. I ventured further into the house, into the kitchen. There were smashed plates and glasses on the ground, and there were some cobwebs. I thought it was odd. Do houses like this typically have cobwebs and dust, even when they've only been abandoned for a few months? What was even weirder was the center of the room. There was a fairly large wood table in the center of the room. There was a Disney-themed tablecloth. The tablecloth was torn, but the table seemed untouched. What was weird about the tablecloth, aside from the rips and tears, was that every one of the Disney characters on the cloth had some sort of deformity, like Mickey had no ears, Goofy didn't have his little black nose, and Donald was missing a leg. Realizing I had the camera, I snapped a picture. The camera flash was creepy in the dark. It really lit up the character's deformities, which was not good for my stomach. It was weird. I seriously thought that I was going to puke right then and there, but I didn't. I thought my mental state was going to deplete faster, but no. My brain seemed to be giving me mixed signals. At one moment, it wanted me to get out as fast as my legs would carry me. Then, it would want me to go further for the sake of my own sick curiosity. This brain of mine is too weird to understand. I guess my brain wanted to get back at me for coming here because I felt as if something was behind me. I didn't turn around immediately as I was fearful as what I would see. I thought I was going to die. My heart began to pound. I began sweating like a flipping waterfall. I slowly turned around, shocked by what my eyes were met with. Nothing. Nothing was behind me except dead air space. I wiped the sweat from my forehead with the back of my hand. I threw some light where I was looking just to make sure that nothing was there, and sure enough, there was nothing there. I had to shake my head and stay there for a second before I carried on. I then went back to the living room and took a right. I scanned the hallway, which seemed to be in the worst state. The paint was peeling, the roof dipped down at one point, and it seemed like the whole roof could collapse at any second. Then, My eyes seemed to twitch towards something. I saw a bedroom. I shined my flashlight into it, and it seemed untouched. The bed was intact. The walls were still gorgeously painted with a light blue. It looked as if it belonged to a young boy. It was at that moment that my brain remembered why we were here, to get the doll. Knowing that my treasure could be in there, I shined my light around. No immediate threats, so I decided to go in there, and in there was that one item that I wanted. That Pinocchio doll. I quickly walked over to it and put the light on it. The first thing that caught my eyes were his eyes. They seemed to be more realistic than most dolls were. It was odd, for lack of a better word. It had white goop dripping from its nose and eyes, much like the heads I had just seen. My brain then connected something, the man who died, and this goop. Were they related somehow? First the man, then the heads, and now this. It wasn't blood, that's for sure. What was this foreign substance? I decided to be stupid though, and put some on my finger. I lifted it to my nose and smelt it. It was awful. My nose wrinkled up and my eyes watered. It smelled like sewage. What in the world would have gotten into this doll to make it smell like that? I didn't want to be here any longer. I'd had enough of this. I just wanted to get the doll and go home. I decided that I would clean it at home. I gathered it up and put it into the bag. It was a little heavier than I imagined, but nothing I couldn't handle. I had gotten what I came for, the doll. My spirits seemed to lighten a little bit. I walked out of the bedroom. I thought that all this crazy paranoia stuff would stop, until, that is, I saw one of the heads twitch. Wait, what? That was my first thought. Why was this head twitching? I had to stop and just stare, and the head seemed to be fine with that. It kept on twitching, getting more and more violent, more of that white goop coming out of it. It went all over the room. Some of it hit me in the face, and of course I repulsed back. What the hell is happening? I had finally snapped. I couldn't take this anymore. Then my bag rustled. I turned to be met with a hand popping out of my bag. I tore my bag off and dropped it on the floor. My heart began pounding like a drum. The doll crawled out of the bag and looked at me, its eyes fixed on my body, and the white goop dripping out of its mouth and eyes.
"Welcome to the House of Disney,"
it said in that sweet, innocent Pinocchio voice. I began to walk back. The doll didn't follow. It just stood there and said,
"Welcome to the House of Disney."
It said it repeatedly. Fear was rising inside me until I had to run. That doll muttered one last thing before I turned and ran.
"Welcome to the House of
Hell." I darted out of the house with no plans to ever return. What just happened? Is that doll possessed? It didn't take me long until I got back to my home. I ran inside and slammed the door. Then I collapsed on the floor, trying to calm myself down. I had to contemplate what the hell just happened. Was this some sick prank? Or was it something more? I realized something. My camera. I still had it. I sat up quickly and looked at it. I went to the full album to see the pictures I took, but on there was a picture I didn't take. Remember that man I mentioned? There was a picture of that doll, strangling him. The white goop was oozing out of the doll's eyes and mouth. It was also seeping out of the doll's hands, and it covered the guy. I stared at the camera for what seemed like forever. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Who or what took that picture? I definitely didn't take it. I threw the camera away as hard as I could. It smashed on the wall. I didn't care if I would be called a liar. I didn't want anything to do with that doll. I didn't want anything to do with that house. I got up and sat on my couch. I had to relax my brain. It was thrashing violently, and you know what? I felt something drip on me. I looked at my shoulder to be greeted by white goop. I never figured out what had caused that goop. But remember how I said I used to live there? Yeah, That's the reason I moved. I was scared. I had to flee, and flee fast. Now that I sit in my home typing this, I realize now they might have moved. To start off with, I now reside in a completely different state after leaving my job with the Walt Disney World Resort in Orlando. I used to be what one would describe as a suit. I'm one of the guys that walks around the park in plain sight, yet hidden to the public. I'm part of the elite group of black polo sporting undercover security officers that specialize in worse things than shoplifters and unruly park guests. You see, if you are at Disney World and you see more than a few guys in one place wearing black polos, then you're most likely in danger and you should leave the area immediately. The sad part is, we are so good at blending in with the woodwork that you wouldn't even notice us. Anyway, let me cut to the chase here. I've seen some pretty weird things at Disney World during my time. These anomalies that everyone speaks of, well, they are true, but the least of our concerns. See, the thing is, when you take hundreds of thousands of people and cram them into a relatively small place, weird shit is going to happen. We have had kids, even adults, get lost in the park, cryptozoological sightings, alien sightings, ghost sightings, and just generally unexplainable things happen all the time. I was a senior special security officer during the height of my time there and got called for some pretty dark shit. Many of you think we, as in the security detail I was in, were covering up for Disney Corp. But in our true nature, we were damage control and we were kept out of the loop on things and were trained not to question, but to diffuse. There was one thing though that to this day still bothers me. A cast member called us on the next cell to report that a group of 4 children had gone missing on the land. Of course, I thought, another one of those anomalies. For those of you who don't know the eerily calming nature ride called Living with the Land, it's located in the Land and the Sea Pavilion over by Soarin'. The odd thing about this report is that we have never received one of these complaints before, and of course, we're issued cover-up stories to tell cast members or guests to calm them down. My colleague calmly came up with a story and explained that the kids were part of an educational program and they exited the boat with a guide and were escorted into the botany lab that exists on the ride. I told her not to ask any questions or talk about the incident as to not spread false rumors, and had my colleague escort her to a nearby security office to have her sign some forms. My human nature took over and I got curious and entered the ride on the next boat alone. Living with the Land is boring and not particularly popular, so I can understand how the kids would be on the boat alone and also how I could get on the boat by myself. I noticed absolutely nothing until I came to the part of the ride that has the prairie farmhouse. It looks like a fox house, but something about it just never sat right with me. As I've done hundreds of times before on rides, I jumped off the boat and onto the scene where the house is. I noticed something funny though. There were no pressure mats and the boat went away, allotting about a good 30 seconds before the next boat got to the scene. I've never seen a ride with no pressure mats to detect if anyone disembarks the ride. So, quick recap, kids disappear on ride. I show up and feed the cast member who reported it some story about how they disembarked mid-ride and are on tour of the lab and for her not to question it. A colleague of mine takes her away to debrief. I contacted the new cast member operating the ride and tell him to put some space between the next boat as I'm looking for a lost wedding ring. Bull, I know. So what? I slowly started to walk up the fox house. Climbing the steps up to the porch, I noticed a small emblem on the left window. It's a small square and compass symbol. Interesting that a Masonic symbol is hidden here. I figured whoever built the ride was a Freemason and brushed it off. I looked in the windows of the house and it was nothing but curtains with black plywood behind them. I thought that there was nothing to see here, but still something inside me decided that wasn't good enough. The front door glided open to a bright room with a black and white checkerboard floor. There was a marble altar-like table on the opposite end of the room with some kind of weird throne-like chair built into the front of it and a gold cup on the tabletop. The only other thing that was noticeable was a heavy wooden door on the other end of the room that was locked. There were no windows or anything else. I thought it was weird because I was always under the impression that this house was fake. Human nature took over again, and against my better judgment, I tried the door in the room. But I was relieved that it was locked. I tried my keys, but none of them worked. Here's the thing. At Disney, we use a lock system called BEST. This had interchangeable cores that have assigned numbers and/or letters. This is so we can issue keys only to certain areas. I have the general master key, which essentially is the real key to the kingdom. Interesting thing about this lock was that my master key didn't open it. I looked closer and it was a BEST lock, but the inspiration said CC on it, which I've never seen before. Since the door wasn't open, I decided to just leave it. On my way out, I noticed on the floor there was a fast pass printed out for Soarin'. I picked it up and put it in my pocket. It's amazing how trash works its way into odd places. I'm going to figure out where these kids went. I rode the boat back out of the platform and went back to the Epcot security office to play back some footage from the DVR. It took me a while, but I zeroed in on the period where the kids entered the Land and Sea Pavilion and followed them. There were 4 kids total, 3 girls and 1 boy. The girls' actions were almost robotic and it sent a chill up my spine. They walked in a straight line through the pavilion, but what scared me was there was a man with them, escorting them through the place. I paused and looked closer when I realized the man was wearing a black polo and khakis, the same thing I was wearing. Holy shit! I even recognized him. He was one of my colleagues. Alan is the guy that was at the scene before I got there, the same guy who fed the cast member at the control podium the bullshit about the kids going on a tour. I thought maybe he did actually send them on the tour of the botanic lab and lost track of them until I hit play on the film. The boy was not walking in line and I could tell he was giving Alan problems. He keeps venturing away and getting distracted by various things in the pavilion. The benefit of the doubt I gave Alan subsided when I see the kid go press the button for the fast pass on Soarin' and take the paper fast pass almost like a prize. Alan then tugged him away and stood back and observed as the kids walked to living with the land. I saw them get on the boat. I saw them through the storm scene, through the rainforest scene, then through the desert scene. After the desert, I lost the boat on camera. The ride stops momentarily. You could see it on the other scenes, and once it resumes, I saw the boat again in a scene with the pictures of farmers. The boat was empty. I also saw freaking Alan looking down off the observation deck, which explains how we responded so quickly. I switched the cameras back to live view and left the area. I haven't been exactly honest with you thus far. I know a lot of things of what Disney does and things that we respond to that a regular security officer wouldn't deal with. I have seen them experiment so many things, such as eugenics, pharmaceutical engineering, even experimenting with gas. Have you ever noticed that on both Spaceship Earth and the monorail that you get a strange calm feeling on those rides? Well, they're pumping low doses of laughing gas in those areas. Ever heard of Room O? They were wearing gas masks for a reason. Ever hear of gascots? Well, that's not important right now. I would encourage you to research it. I never thought what we did was okay by containing these dark secrets, but it paid well. I've seen them quickly inject some experimental drugs on guests and throw them back out there. Our job was to monitor and contain them if things went haywire. I know that I'm the bad guy, but this wasn't normal. This wasn't procedural. First thing I did was go over to the room where we keep the keys. I looked through the logbooks for the core labeled CC. I found it but had no zone or specific location issued to the core, and the number of copies was marked as 1. The key was in our system, but my master key didn't open it. I grabbed the core key and a few Zone 1 cores. The The core key is a specific key that, when inserted into the lock, will remove the core so it can be replaced with another. I put this in my pocket and make a beeline for the land and sea pavilion. I may be paranoid, but I swear I saw Alan following me in the shadows. I got to the ride and got to the house and back in the front door to the Masonic room and locked the front door as I entered. I inserted the core key into the lock on the wooden door, removed the core, and inserted the Zone 1 core into the lock. Now, my master key will open the door, and boy did it. The door glided open. It was heavy and steel on the other side of the wood face. There was a velvet red carpet staircase leading down to some kind of utilidor, but we are in Epcot, what the hell. There is one small utilidor in Epcot, but it doesn't go this deep. I descended the stairs and walked down the red carpeted hallway to these two double doors. Behind these doors was my answer, and the truth as to what happened to these kids. Through these doors was the darkest side of Disney, a side of Disney that even I couldn't believe. Would Walt be in favor of this? Or is this one of Eisner's little ideas for making more money off his guests? Behind these doors was an empty, dimly lit room with a small circular platform in the center. The carpet was the same lush red velvet carpet from the hallway. There were 6 leather armchairs around the circular platform, all with telephones and card readers on the table next to the chair. Inside, I knew what was going on. I knew what was happening here. This is one thing I will not cover up for Disney. I stood there in disbelief and horror and noticed a small door towards the back of the room. I went over and popped out the CC core, put it in my pocket, and put in a Zone 1 core. I heard someone clear their throat from the front of the room. It was Alan. He had an annoyed look on his face and held a gun aimed right at me. I slowly propped the door open on the latch and turned to face him. "You never should have come here," he said to me when he was stepping towards me. "So this is what you and your scumbag friends resorted to? We did some pretty fucked up shit, Alan, but this is a new low for you and your disgusting friends." I had my hand at my side and blocked the view of me slipping the Zone 1 core out of the handle and into my pocket. "It's not going to matter because no one is going to find out." He raised the gun, and like something out of an action movie, I ripped the door open as he pulled the trigger as a bullet hit the door. I jumped backwards through the doorway and shut it behind me. That asshole was stuck because I had both cores in my pocket, so there was no way he could open the door. He started shooting the door and moved forward. I walked down a hallway with these small cell-like rooms lining the hall, and inside were those play school chairs and a few toys. I checked every one of them and they were all empty. I got to the end of the hallway and there was this huge metal vault-like door. I popped the last Zone 1 core into the door to replace the CC core and pulled the steel door open to be hit in the face with sunlight. I was outside on some utility road off premises of Epcot. The road led away. I was too late. They were already gone. For good. I called the police, but they never came. I called the FBI, but they never took me seriously. Hell, I even called the CIA, but they said they didn't deal with domestic issues like that and referred me back to the FBI. I showed up at Orange County Police Department HQ and they took a report, but I heard something fall in the trash when I was leaving. Disney's good at what they do. They're good at keeping secrets, and they're good at controlling any outside force that attempts to bring their secrets to light. I'm lucky I saw the sunlight again, and I'm lucky to have had time to leave the state before they got me. If you got there, please keep your kids close. Watch out for the guys in the black polos. They may be monitoring you. They may be responding to something that will put you in danger. As far as I know, they aren't the ones that pick out the merchandise. I don't even know who does that. I was about 6 or 7 when we took a family holiday to Disneyland, Florida. I was a fairly aloof child, and stranger danger was something that had been drilled into us at school. My mom was paranoid about us not going off with strangers and was convinced that I was a target, being a blue-eyed blonde kid. All I wanted was my freedom to run around. Nope. From day one, I had a Velcro strap put around my wrist, with a boingy cable linking me to my mom, who wore the other end on her wrist. I was effectively on a leash. A week at Disney on a leash was hell for me, and probably for my parents too. Nowadays, you'd call it ADD. Back then, it was called naughty. If I wasn't trying to undo the strap, I was barking like a dog, howling like a dog, or rolling around on the floor. I was a joy of a child. The last day there, I had calmed down. Well, I was speaking like a human again, rather than a dog. I begged and begged for my parents to let me off the leash until finally they gave in and said yes, I could take the strap off, but I had to hold one of their hands. Fair deal. All went swimmingly to begin with. I stayed close with my parents, held their hands. As time went by and it became clear I wasn't going to run off, I was allowed moments of freedom. No hands, woohoo. There were so many exciting things, like seeing all my favorite Disney characters waving, my favorite music playing. We began to cross an open area, which I think was generally towards the exit of the park. I was still hands-free. My attention was firmly fixed on Minnie Mouse, who was ahead of me. When my dad grabbed my hand, I stuck to the rules. The deal was I held my parents' hands, so off we went toward the exit to leave. When Dad started running, I began to run too. I wasn't sure where we were running to, but I was a hyperactive child. So in my head I was like, yay, running. Then I heard my mom scream, and I mean scream, my name from behind me. I looked over my shoulder to see my mom, brother, and to my surprise, my dad chasing after me. I felt a hand holding mine tighten and look up at the man I thought was my dad. He was a mid-50s man with gray hair and a gray beard. Not my 40-year-old dad with black hair and no beard. Creepy dude never once looked at me. His face was blank and he looked pretty calm. My little feet brakes came on out of shock, and I became a lead weight, which along with the people who stopped around us due to mom screaming was enough for my family to catch up with me. Would-be child abductor then clearly decided that he didn't fancy his chances against my dad, dropped my hand, and disappeared. My dad chased him and my mom and brother grabbed me. I can't remember much of what happened afterwards. Dad was built for comfort, not speed, so he didn't catch the dude. Mom was hysterical. I was gutted because this meant I was never going to be let off the leash again. I think my parents saw the police out there and they said that there were a number of attempted abductions around that time at the Disney park. Disney child abductor? Let's not meet again. If you haven't watched even one Disney movie throughout your childhood, there is something terribly wrong with you. I was a Disney fanatic, and I truly mean that. Growing up, it was the only thing I've ever watched. Most kids, especially 10 or 11-year-olds, would switch the television to Baywatch or Desperate Housewives. Something their parents would prohibit them from when no one is at home. But I was perfectly happy with my Pinocchio and Lady and the Tramp, thank you very much. The only explanation I can have for my obsession is that I'm an only child, so naturally, the TV does become your best friend. I've never traveled much. Both my parents research on medicine and therapy for cancer, so work is not considered something that's scheduled. They usually work weekends too, and when they don't, it's a cause to celebrate. Basically, all I know is Australia. The last trip we took was to Gold Coast 2 years ago. In recent years, however, the research had progressed much more, which means my parents need to clock in more hours. I've never pestered my parents to go out of their way for leisure. I know they're too stressed out with their jobs for that. 6 months ago, the Fengs moved in next door. Just having migrated from Hong Kong, the Fengs seemed pleasant enough. We'd met them a total of 4 times, which says quite a bit for my parents. Mr. and Mrs. Fang have 2 kids, Lynn and Anne. Anne was 7 and Lynn was 2 months elder to me. Upon our second meeting or so, I immediately struck up a friendship with the kids. We began to talk about TV and soon, I learned that the girls loved Disney as much as I did. Once after school, I'd even gone to their house to see their Disney collectibles. I was awestruck. When my parents realized I was getting closer to the Fangs, they decided to strengthen the friendship. So, the following Sunday, they invited the family home to dinner. Thoroughly excited, I grabbed my entire Disney movie collection ready to discuss and maybe watch a movie or two, if time permitted. As my parents prepared the meal and set the place up, I rambled on and on with what my playdates consisted of with Anne and Lynn. My parents feigned interest quite well, although I could see how tired their eyes were. They were, for the most part, hosting this dinner for me. They were happy to see how happy I was. As an 11-year-old, I could read people quite well. When the Fangs arrived, I stole the kids away to my room. To my excitement, they brought their collectibles and cartoon figures as well. "Have you ever been to Disneyland?" Anne asked me. "No," I said. "I've never left the country. Have you?" "Yeah, we used to live 4 hours away from the Disneyland in Hong Kong," Ling said. My mouth dropped open. "What's it like?" "It's magical. We've been there at least 8 or 9 times. We got called for dinner shortly after, and at the dinner table, I blurted my newfound information to my parents. "Mom, Dad, did you know the Fangs have been to Disneyland at least 9 times? Mrs. Fang smiled warmly. "Oh yes, the kids absolutely love the place. We used to make it a point to go on at least one of their birthdays." I looked on in amazement. "Can I see some pictures?" "Sure, I've got them on my phone. I'll email them to your mom when I've got time." "You know," started Mr. Fang, "we're going back to Hong Kong next month for Easter vacation. We've got some visa stuff to tie up, so it'll be a short trip. We'd be happy to take Blair with us and show her Disneyland if she'd like to see it." A silence took over the table. I whipped my head towards my parents. My parents raised their eyebrows and were quite surprised with the offer. Lynn broke the silence. "Oh my God, please, can you send Blair, Mr. Crawford? Please?" she pleaded. Dad laughed. "We'd have to consider it, but it does sound quite fantastic. Would you be interested?" he asked me. "Is that even a question?" I cried. Okay, let's discuss it with a rational mind," Mom joked. "We'll let you know, Pan. Thanks for the offer, though. It's really generous of you." "No problem. We love to have her. I'm sure the kids would love some company this time. To be frank, we wouldn't have visited the park this year, but I think this is a special occasion," Mrs. Fang said. After the Fangs left that night, I burst out with all my excitement. My parents had a long discussion about it and agreed to send me. They said they would go over the specifics with the Fangs, but they think it'll be quite a journey for me to go on, especially since I've never really traveled, and they doubt they'd have the time to take me anywhere for a while. We were set to leave in 3 weeks, but I wasn't in the right mind to focus on school or anything related. All day, I would look at pictures of Disneyland on Google and browse through the popular theme park attractions and entertainment acts that I would want to experience. I knew Lynn and Anne would know best, but I was too excited to care. Time flew and I found myself outside the gates of Disneyland. That week in Hong Kong had been comparatively boring. Mr. and Mrs. Fang were indulged in visa work, and the kids and I had to stay back at their hotel. I realized I didn't have much in common with the girls, and I was secretly thankful the trip was only going to last a week. Plus, they were saving the best for last. I hadn't woken up in time for breakfast that day, so Mr. and Mrs. Fang were nice enough to bring my breakfast to my room. I ate up because I knew it would be an eventful day, and I needed the energy. We were there on a Friday, so the park was semi-packed. We stood in line to get our tickets and a range of emotions overtook me. It was the overwhelm of living my childhood dream, paired with a culture shock of being in an entirely new territory. I hung on to the way people spoke and paid attention to their dialect and the way their tongues clicked with unfamiliar sounds. Maybe I would learn Mandarin when I'm older, I made a mental note. I liked the way the language sounded. There was a family of 5 in front of us in the line, and it struck me as odd that none of them were talking. They were simply standing there and robotically moving their feet as the people ahead of them gave way. Their heads were focused on what was in front of them, and they never looked up to see what was happening around them. Maybe they've been here too many times, I thought, and shrugged it off. However, when they bought their tickets, they mumbled to the guy at the counter. I was right behind them, and it was inaudible to me. I wondered how a guy across the glass heard them. Mr. Fang cut through me and bought the tickets for us. We entered the gates, and I was squealing to the girls, forgetting all about the strange family in front of us. What do we do first? Where do we go first? Which ride do we go on first? I pored over the map that I had grabbed from the entrance. Shall we get some ice cream first? Mr. Fang suggested with a laugh. You girls need to get some food in your system before we begin the festivities. Yes, screeched Anna, and we all followed Mr. and Mrs. Fang to the ice cream stand in tow. As he ordered, I skimmed over the map and noticed something strange. I had visited the Disneyland website almost every day back in Australia. I knew all the rides, shows, and attractions by heart. Somehow, I couldn't find any of it on the map. There were similarities, but not one name or item was exactly the same. Lynn noticed my silence and said, I know the map by heart. You don't have to look through it so intensely. I know, I mumbled, but I can't find anything that I'd seen online. I mean, they were all different on the website. For example, Mystic Land wasn't Mysteryland. Lynn looked at the map over my shoulder. That's strange. Are you sure you were on the right site? I heard that all the Disneyland parks are not always consistent. Cultural and geographical differences or whatever. I bet you were on Florida Disneyland's website. I reluctantly agreed with her and rolled the map up. I guess we don't need this anymore since you know it by heart, I joked. She giggled and linked her arm with mine. Let's go to Grizzly Gore first, she suggested. It's the closest to where we are. I flinched at the name she mentioned but nodded and the 5 of us set off. My excitement was deteriorating at a lagging pace as I definitely noticed certain unusual things. Children were holding black balloons. The water in the fountains that we passed was distinctly murky, the color of old tea, and disturbingly, there was no face on the Mickey Mouse statues that we passed. His clothes were detailed, but his face was completely blank. I couldn't let that pass, so I asked Lynn about it. What? That's how it's always been, she shrugged. Why aren't you more excited? I thought you'd be dying to get here. I am, I said, absent-mindedly looking around. I didn't anticipate this. I realized there was no gain in telling the things about my observations and how strange it all was. They were jovial as ever, and everyone else looked undisturbed too. I wonder if something was wrong with me or with them. Was it because I'd never been here before? Is this how it's really always been? What do I know? I'm leaving my country for the first time. I haven't had enough exposure and experience to make these kind of judgments. I shrug off my misconceptions and appreciate the fact I'm living my childhood dream. I forcefully ignored anything out of the ordinary, things that I knew definitely shouldn't be there. I put on a brave face and showed the Fangs I appreciated the fact that they brought me here. But I forgot about all that when I met Snow White. Character experiences were common all through the park, but this was the first one we'd had. One look at her and I immediately knew something was wrong. Her mascara was smudged and ran down her cheeks as though she'd been crying. Her eyes were red and puffy, her lipstick sloppily lined her mouth. She had a gash on her neck which was freshly clotting up. Her hair was unevenly cut and her clothes had been subtly torn. She smiled in a sick way at the kids around her as they posed for pictures together. Maybe Lynn was right about cultural differences, but this was way too far-fetched. I may not know Hong Kong, but I know Disney, and Disney characters aren't supposed to look like that. I felt queasy in my stomach, especially when Anne pulled me to take a picture with her. Your parents would love to see this, Mrs. Fang smiled. I stood next to the deranged Snow White, and it took everything in me not to throw up. She smelled of spoiled milk and an unwashed dog. We kept walking until we came across the first ride, the Mad Teacups. I didn't say it wrong, and you heard it right. When I looked at the people on the ride, I felt goosebumps rise on my arm, not from the adrenaline of watching fast-paced rides, but rather the strange feeling of dread I'd been feeling the entire day. It was at a peak at that moment. Every single person on the ride was unconscious, heads lolling in the direction that the teacups would take them, and there was no screams or shouts of excitement that usually explode from an enjoyable ride. "I don't want to try that out," I blurted. I was getting tired of the calm front I was putting up for the Fangs. Mr. Fang looked at me curiously. "Do you have a fear of rides, dear?" "Just this one," I thought. I nodded. I'm not feeling too well." Mrs. Fang bit her lip and looked concerned. "Oh no, should we be worried?" A little too late for that. I shook my head and tried to gulp my nausea away. "Okay, we have two options," Anne said. "We can go on the Raspy River Cruise, or we can go watch the Disney Deadlock Evening Show." The river cruise sounded deadly, plus I didn't want to be traveling on water, what with my feelings of unease. I opted for the Disney show, wondering what on earth the name indicated. Walking in, I knew to expect the worst. I knew it wouldn't be an average happy-go-lucky rekindle your childhood memories Disney movie fiesta. This entire experience was abnormal. I wasn't even sure if this was really happening at this point. The audience at the show was quiet, and I don't mean the low chatter, soft whispers kind of quiet. I mean dead silence. Not one word. The only sound was the spectators shuffling into the theater. None of the Fangs spoke either. They were silently looking around at other people at the dark, empty stage. I did the same. I didn't feel like talking. Maybe I should just go to sleep. I snapped from my ephemeral slumber as something similar to classical music started to blare over the speakers. I don't know much about orchestras or old music, but it sounded like I was at the opera. The music was highly unfitting. It wasn't Disney in any sense. I knew every soundtrack in every movie, and I had never heard this before. It didn't sound Asian either. Shocked didn't even cut how I was feeling at this point though. I was tired of being shocked. My thoughts were cut off when all my favorite Disney characters started showing up on stage. Here were all the classical cartoon characters right in front of me, except they weren't. Mickey, Minnie, Donald, Goofy, and Daisy were wearing their clothes, but they had no color, dressed in all black and white. They were miming their actions. The music got louder every second, but the story itself, however, was difficult to ignore. I can't remember everything, but it ran on the lines of Daisy wanting to commit suicide and Mickey helping her. On the side of the stage, it appeared as though Donald and Goofy were raping Minnie, who was vigorously resisting the duo mutely. The music became sadder and sadder until it stopped when Daisy succeeded in committing suicide. No, she actually did. The actor who was wearing the suit cut through it and stabbed herself in the stomach multiple times. The first row of the audience was engulfed in blood. It was at that point I started screaming. I screamed until all the air in my lungs would allow it, and my vision started to blur. The shock and horror was too much. Being away from my parents, being in an entirely new country with people I hadn't known for even a year, to having all my childhood dreams rattled in the span of a day and watching people die right in front of me. It was too much. I knew I was going to pass out from the shock, from the pain, from the dread. From the moment I'd stepped into the Disneyland, I'd felt unsafe. It wasn't like I wasn't supposed to be here, like I'd been doing myself a great wrong. I can't remember when I'd stopped screaming. I can't remember much after that. All I can tell you is that when the paramedics arrived to take me away, they found 150 micrograms of acid in my system.